So things in Europe are getting from bad to worse, and this is a story of the economic war spiraling out of control. And we need to talk about the farmers' protest and how it is tearing the Eurozone apart. And on the other hand, Germany is also moving to arm twist the US for more money. They want $60 billion more to fight Russia, which will prolong the conflict well into 2025 and beyond, which will mean more supply chain shocks, a continued inflation crisis, and the further weakening of all the Western economies. Across Europe, farmers are up in arms. They are protesting the destruction of their livelihoods because the EU's plan to go carbon neutral has finally crossed the line. Roads are being blocked across the entire Eurozone, from Germany and France to Italy and Poland. The whole continent is on fire. Most recently, Spanish farmers have joined the protests and they are blockading roads and highways. And this sense of anger is another sign that all the decisions made by the EU, whether it's the war or climate change, have been absolute disasters. Across the EU, farmers represent between 5 to 15% of the workforce, and that is a ton of jobs at risk, especially in Eastern Europe like Poland and Romania. Countries like Spain also have a big agricultural sector that is feeding the entire continent. The last group of people you want to piss off, you want angry, are the farmers. Because if things get bad enough, Europe could go hungry. The protests won't stop and might last all the way until June. Another inflation crisis could be coming for Europe if the farmers stop production long enough. So why are the farmers outraged? What is sparking the protests? Well, it's a deadly combination of higher farming costs, crazy environmental rules, and a flood of imports coming from Ukraine. Now, just in 2022 alone, over 13 billion euros of food imports came from Ukraine, and that is a 100% increase. A ton of supply is flooding into Europe from Ukraine, which is causing a big glut and causing prices to crash down. To help Ukraine sell their grain, the EU opened the doors to Europe, but they forgot about their own local farmers. So margins for EU farmers are already getting squeezed before the flood of Ukrainian grain. And this is on top of higher fuel and fertilizer prices. The EU was forced to also scrap their pesticide ban, which aimed to cut usage down by 50% to save the environment, right? So we are seeing a big disconnect between the local farmers and the politicians in Brussels. But there's also the matter of double standards in the EU. Europe has signed many trade agreements with other food exporters in the world. And these are countries that can sell cheaper to the EU because they aren't constrained by environmental rules. And this is a handicap to local farmers in Europe, and once again, it's another supply and demand crisis. As a result of the farmers' protest, France is forced to address this crisis. Macron is telling the EU to stop these trade agreements to prevent cheap exports from flooding the EU. Europe is about to conclude a free trade agreement with South America, and if this happens, countries like Brazil and Argentina can effectively export food to Europe without tariffs. 93% of taxes will be gone, with the remaining 7% to be lowered down as well. And this complicates the food crisis in the EU. If farmers in Brazil can export cheaply to Europe, there is no way farmers back home can really compete. We are going to see the decimation of local farms because profits are getting squeezed. It's an unfair situation where the EU is trying to get cheap food overseas to bring inflation down, but at the same time, they are penalizing their own farmers to reach their climate goals. And it gets worse in Eastern Europe. The war in Ukraine is adding more fuel to the fire because the EU is giving them unconditional support. Countries like Hungary and Poland, they are left holding the bag. Hungarian farmers are protesting near the Ukrainian border, which is going to put intense pressure on Brussels to really take action. And this is one battle Viktor Orban is not going to lose. The financial damage is starting to mount up and farmers are losing money in absolute terms. According to experts, the average loss for planting wheat will be around 300 euros per hectare. So if you're a farmer and you're losing money growing food, the only logical outcome is to simply stop planting. When you threaten the livelihoods of farmers, the knock-on effects for the entire economy are disastrous. If enough farmers call it quits and they close down, there will be a food shortage in the EU, and this will cause higher prices across an economy that's already one foot in the recession grave. So Europe has to make a tough choice. Do they scrap the unfair trade agreements? More importantly, will they throw the Green Deal into the bin? Because it won't make much of a difference now. Even with the additional measures, it will reduce emissions by just 5% over the next few decades. It's just a blip on the radar. It's basically virtue signaling that will cost farmers across Europe their livelihoods, which makes you wonder which is the real threat to EU economic recovery. Is it all about Russia or their own policies back in Brussels as well? But of course, you need to blame someone, and that someone is Putin's global food crisis. It's Russia's fault, and the solution isn't to reverse all the climate agenda, but to fight on in Ukraine. So the war isn't stopping. We are heading towards the second anniversary in a couple of weeks, and it's very likely more money is heading to Ukraine very soon. The Eurozone has approved $54 billion to Ukraine. Hungary's opposition has failed, and Germany is moving full steam ahead to get money from Joe Biden. Remember, that was money that could have gone to the farmers to subsidize production, but it's heading to Zelensky instead. Olaf Scholz has gone to America, and he's warning the US of a Putin victory in Ukraine. Because the US Senate is in a deadlock, the $60 billion is in limbo. Germany, they are getting anxious because they have already mortgaged their future for Project Ukraine, and now they want Americans to do the same thing. You better cough out the money because we are another $50 billion into this round. Countries throughout the EU, they have sacrificed their economy to keep the fight going. Over the last 2 years, every single EU country has hindered their own economic growth to bankroll Ukraine. Germany has given 0.9% of their GDP, 1.2% from Poland, and almost 2% from Lithuania. Once again, this is money that could be used for the domestic economy or to reduce the effects of the energy crisis. In absolute terms, Germany is the second biggest individual donor to Ukraine. While the US comes in at number 1, Germany has given over $22 billion worth of aid, and that puts it at number 2. They have invested a lot of money into supporting Ukraine, and if the Russians win, all this money, all this cash will literally evaporate into thin air. It will be impossible to answer to the people across Germany and the entire Europe. And this is the textbook example of the sunk cost fallacy, and it looks like Joe Biden is pushing hard for the money to come as well. The US president calls the failure to fund Ukraine close to criminal neglect, saying it is outrageous that the money has been delayed. So you can see the doubling down of US policy to give $60 billion to Ukraine. It's just a matter of time before the money comes in. Maybe Biden caves in on the border issue, or maybe there's some plan B hidden elsewhere in the Senate. But regardless, I find it near impossible that the money won't come. They will find a way to finesse it into law. And as it stands, we are one step closer towards the unthinkable. The US Senate has edged closer to passing a bill that includes $95 billion for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Germany is going to get their wish fulfilled of the US getting embroiled further into the mess. The more money they get sunk in, the harder it will be to call it quits. And of the entire G7, remember that Germany is in a worse spot. Their economy just contracted, and Olaf Scholz needs to justify Germany's huge economic sacrifice. Everyone is aware that Germany's days as an industrial superpower are ending. German industries are still suffering horribly from the energy crisis. As a result, the entire foundation of the country is on really shaky ground. When you have to pay more for energy, it makes you less competitive. Since 2021, energy bills in Germany have soared. It went from 9 cents per kilowatt hour to 22 cents in 2023. That's nearly 150% more in just 2 years, driving input costs higher for all manufacturers. The only country with higher energy inflation other than Germany is Italy. Now, the hardest hit industries include chemicals. Nearly 1 in 10 companies will permanently halt production processes. As a result, big brands like BASF are laying off thousands of jobs. Germany could suffer from a rolling recession because the deck is stacked against them. You have competition from cheap Chinese goods and endless US subsidies. So it's not a surprise why German investments are moving overseas. Input costs in the country are getting higher, and Europe as a whole is getting regulated more and more. The farmers' protest is a perfect example of climate warriors versus the real economy. And when asked why they are moving away, companies all say it's mainly due to better energy costs. 82% are worried about it. Other reasons also include lower labor costs, a better market environment, and fewer regulations. The energy crisis just exposed the issues Germany was facing. Companies now either start to relocate away, or they could really face financial collapse. When sales and profits drop, they ignite a serious problem in corporate debt. Rising distress in Germany signals a lot more struggles ahead. 15% of German companies are troubled, facing the risk of defaulting on their debt. Every company today is facing higher interest payments. As the Federal Reserve hike rates up, the cost of rolling over debt heads up as well. However, German companies are facing a double whammy. Not only are loans more expensive to service, Your revenues and your profits are also falling, so you might not have the cash on hand to settle your obligations. Across the entire Eurozone, Germany tops the corporate distress rankings. Nearly 15% of German companies are in big trouble. Even the UK and France, they're faring better than the Germans. Because of this distress, the vultures are starting to circle Germany. When there's a loan distress, it's great news for bargain hunters. Private equity firms are flocking to Berlin to buy out family business cheaply. Lenders are also eager to lend German companies loans at crazy high interest rates. Money is still being made in Germany, just not the German people themselves, but private companies like Blackstone. The industrial base is getting hollowed out for Wall Street. So it's quite clear why Olaf Scholz wants the US to double down on Ukraine as well. When the Titanic is sinking, you want someone next to you to play the violin as the ship sinks. You want a friend to shuffle the deck chairs with. It's unfortunate, but this is where we are today. So will the farmers' protests get worse? I think it will, unless the EU reverses a ton of their policies. And will Ukraine get another $60 billion from America? I believe they will get it. Maybe not this month, maybe not the next month, but very likely within 2024 itself. There is simply no reverse gear now. Between the West and Russia, there's also no room left to compromise. It's either total victory, total defeat, or an endless war to justify the previous $100 billion committed. And during the Tucker interview, Putin said he had no ambitions against the EU, but Germany begs to disagree. A German defense minister is warning that Russia could attack NATO in 5 to 8 years, that World War III is coming. And this is going to fuel more money poured into the war machine and even more aid going to Ukraine for years to come. So don't expect the conflict to end in 2024 or even 2025. This could stretch all the way until 2030. But let me know what you think. Will the farmers get their demands and will the US send the 60 billion over to Ukraine? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.